Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast, where the truth will set you free.
Welcome to the Reality Therapy Podcast. I'm here today with a longtime friend, Ian Perry, and we're going to discuss a little bit about our alma mater, Baylor University. So welcome, Ian.
Yeah, nice to nice to be on here again. Just to reiterate what we were saying right before the record button was hit. I think both of us, we both love Baylor University quite a bit. I was saddened, not surprised, but I was saddened to see some of the people who read my article or looked at the thread and were like, "This is why Baylor University is so horrible." And I mean, on the one hand, I think it will become as corrupt as these people imagine it is now if these things are allowed to continue to go to seed in various departments. But there's many departments which are just truly excellent and give a truly excellent Christian education. As I was discussing with Ryan right before, he and I were in the same dorm. We knew each other probably more our freshman year. He didn't know this about me, but I had actually kind of left the Christian faith for several years while I was at Baylor, which I guess will reinforce its detractors and until a little bit afterward. And not in a particularly dramatic way. Somebody just watching me wouldn't have necessarily known because I went to church and just didn't take communion. And so there's a bit of regret when I look back at my time at Baylor at lost opportunities. But I made many lasting friendships there. I met many very solid Christian professors there. So I care about the school, both personally and as I was telling Ryan, I'm here because of Baylor University in a sense, because that's where my parents met. So for me, it's just a very important place. As I mentioned in the article, I also have just a very deep family roots in Texas on many sides of my family. So I care about it as a Texas institution. Even if none of my kids ever went to Baylor, I care about Texas and I care about the oldest continuously operating school in Texas being a good, wholesome place. Sikkim, even if my kids ended up going somewhere else. And so, yeah, so I'm not all of these developments came out of the blue. And the developments I'm talking about, and you can feel free to jump in and redirect, but basically what happened, a lot of people don't know this about Baylor, but Baylor has for a long time been a haven for liberal Baptists. If you're not a Baptist, I am not a Baptist. I have never been a Baptist, but I did encounter a lot of this at Baylor. Baylor is a haven for people that fled other Baptist institutions, and it has been that way for several decades. I'm told the change maybe happened sometime in the 60s. It hasn't always, you read earlier stuff about Baylor, it hasn't always been that way, but as long as Ryan and I have been alive, it's been that way. And it's, when I was there, I mean, when my parents were there, the Christian, the religion department was already dissuading people, some people away from the faith, or at least a more conservative view of the faith. My father recently passed away, but when he was alive, he had talked about, I think it was a Methodist preacher's daughter who just left in tears by an interaction with a religion professor. He's some small town Methodist preacher's daughter, if I remember the story. And so the religion department, some of them were kind of militantly anti-fundamentalist or anti-conservative. But now it's kind of gone a bit further. What happened most recently, Baylor had a big scandal. They picked a new president, and she had already been in Rod Dreyer's, one of the few people that's covered it, but there'd been some notice of some diversity trainings or some trainings that the university had been pushing, which seemed to depart from its mission, even before COVID and the Floyd riots. But once those hit, things got completely nuts at Baylor. Baylor was not an institution that really provided a good witness amidst those times. I met, a lot of the issues that happened during COVID, reasonable people, I think, disagreed on at the time. Reasonable people can have different views of vaccines or what sort of mitigation measures were appropriate. But Baylor went nuts on the stuff which there should have been, like, if you're just grounded in the facts, they should have known that a lot of the race-based agenda, which was being pushed at the time, was just not really that accurate. And then furthermore, together with that, there's been a continued move away from the stuff which, regardless of what you think of the Black Lives Matter movement, some of the stuff at Baylor is just clearly against Christian doctrinal norms.
I want to jump in there because I was actually on campus. I've been pretty open about this, but I dropped out many years ago. We met originally in the honors dorm, Alexander Hall. Way back in the day, I dropped out because I had a drug and alcohol problem, and back in 2020, I went back to finish up my degree in psychology.
Okay,
So I was
I did not
on.
know that actually. I thought you
I
had finished
Okay, yeah.
beforehand. I didn't know that. You told me something new. So we each told each other something new this
Yeah,
time.
yeah. So I was on campus to witness some of this. My student job was at the Addiction Recovery Center at Baylor, and it was completely woke. And I saw a lot of things on Baylor campus. The very stereotypical pseudo intellectual slop of anti racism. People in different departments recommending you read Ibram X. Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist, Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility, the typical stuff that's just like that. Um, you know, Pumping out this factory of woke people, like that type of mentality. And it was not questioned at all. It was almost like a hive mind in certain areas. But a lot of my professors, I would say a majority of my professors probably voted Democrat if I had to guess. But a lot of them, you wouldn't know too much about their politics because my psychology professors, their primary mission was to teach you psychology. Philosophy was to teach you philosophy.
Yeah.
Statistics teach you statistics. In my mind, Baylor has always, since I've been there, prided itself on academic excellence. And so I think there's two things when we dig into the wokeness aspect of taking over Baylor. One is compromising on biblical principles, so I think is very important to both of us, and the other is compromising on good academic scholarship, which is also important to both of us.
Yeah, there's both, and um, I think some of the professors, and this is one area where I didn't. I mean, I did try and focus as I was writing the article, but I did link together the race ideology and the LGBT stuff that we see on campus, which again we'll get into, which some of the professors would not want. They would want to just say, I would think this is me imagining what somebody who's uncomfortable with some of these departures from Christian orthodoxy, who maybe votes Democrat, is maybe not super, or maybe doesn't vote or votes third party, is not super conservative, but is still trying to be an Orthodox Christian, is going to want to separate the two and say they're different, they're not the same. I think they are linked, though. I will try and be fair to people and categorize them accurately as to where they stand. So one of the advisors that Linda Livingston was getting a lot of her advice from, that's my impression, and he had an official position, is a guy named Malcolm Foley. I don't know if you ran into him when you were on campus. I was just watching from a distance. I got married during the plague year, or I got engaged 2020, and I got married at the start of 2021. Baylor, my wife and I drove through campus the day after we got married, but Baylor was not the focus of my attention at that time. But I did notice I was hearing troubling things from the school, and I did pay a little bit of attention. And I don't live at the time I was in Houston, and then my family was in Ellis County, and now I'm back in Ellis County, which is two counties away. I mean, we've got one county in between myself and the county that Baylor's in. So I've been able to go check on. I mean, I can just go there. I enjoy the campus. I like walking around the campus, and some of the stuff I had run into just walking around campus. But anyway, going back a bit, Malcolm Foley was the advisor to Linda Livingston. Now, he is not, as far from what I've seen, he's not for the LGBT stuff. He was a member of the Presbyterian Church in America, which is a conservative denomination. He'd been part of a church plant, and then for various reasons flipped his congregation out of that denomination eventually. But that happened after, maybe a little bit after, around the same time some of the stuff we're talking about. So he has recently written a book where he spells out some of the things that were already implicit in what we saw on campus. So if you read the big report on monuments on campus, and I have a citation, if you go read my giant article, which is, it's longer than a lot of people are going to read, but I'm hoping a journalist sees it and condenses it into something more accessible. So if you read the long report from Baylor on the monuments, there's one footnote in there which it's summarizing a book chapter. It links to the book chapter, blaming or attributing Europe's wealth to or America's wealth to slavery. And then you read Malcolm Foley's book, The Anti-Greed Gospel, and it's very explicit. He says America and Europe are wealthy because of slavery. He says that theft was the original portion of capitalist acquisition, just as a general thing. He's not saying, oh, there's sin in everything. And so he attributes any sort of disparity to some sort of misconduct. There's no allowance for cultural differences, for different values, or anything at all like that of the most minute sort. It's just all negative, all the result of oppression. Any sort of even claims like basically the categories of race are the result of oppression, which is probably different than some other racial extremists. I mean, you could be more extreme and claim, white people were created by Yakub or something like that. I mean, there's obviously worse things than claiming race doesn't exist, but that's just like, not to go off on a rabbit trail, but like ethnic groups are like there are historic anchors which help to form ethnic groups over long periods of time. They're not just categories people came up to oppress other people. Groups can notice each other are different, just passing on a boat or something, and not interacting much after that. People categorize other groups of people, and it's not all based off of a desire to harm those people. It's just noticing, okay, that culture is different than ours, or that group of people is from a different background than ours. It doesn't have to be about oppression, but people being fallen, it often gets entangled with oppression. And so he gets rid of all the nuance and simply tries to categorize everything as the result of oppression, and categorize all differences as the result of oppression. So he was one part of the puzzle. He was on the commission. I think it was a 26-person commission. And so one of them is like, he's not a full Marxist. He makes the point that he doesn't support violence. So he's not like a doctrinaire Marxist, but one of the 26 is supporting very Marxist sort of understandings of race. Another one was the head of, I don't know if he was the head of the religion department then, but the current head of the religion department, who's presided over one of the worst things I uncovered as I was researching this, which gets at how these three things are intertwined: the LGBT stuff, the decline in academic standards in some areas, and the race ideology. Because a whole bunch of departments, when COVID hit and when the race riots started, they published all these anti-racism statements after the Floyd riot started. The religion department was one of them, and they said, basically, they didn't use the exact words, but basically said they were going to hire more people that are not white men. And so they said that wasn't going to lower standards. And from what I've gathered, they've hired more than one extremist, but the one I took the time to read one of their one book chapter by this person, wrote a book chapter claiming this is the entire thesis of the book chapter. This is not me snipping something. This is the entire thing. This is not a bad statement or poorly thought out statement in it. The entire thing is arguing Eve was right to listen to the serpent, or praising Eve for listening to the serpent. That's the entire chapter. Now, she was hired as a result of the diversity push because she checks at least two different diversity boxes. And she then got an award for assigning her students womanist materials. Now, this pro Eve listening to the serpent thing was a self-describedly womanist thing. She has others. I haven't sat down and read through it yet, but I had a concerned parent of a student send me a set of things that she's been assigning her student. So that verifies that she was assigning things that were womanist. That was
What department is this?
This is in the religion department. So the religion department, this is somebody who teaches Christian scripture.
Okay,
So
just to back up, a professor in the religion department who teaches Christian scriptures says Eve was right to listen to the serpent.
Yes,
I want to sit with that for a second.
It's all just praising Eve for listening to the serpent and reinterpreting Eve. Now, I don't know that she really respects the Bible that much, but that's how she frames it. Just praising Eve for listening to the serpent, saying Eve supported diversity by listening to the serpent, she literally says that. That's an actual quote, and you can see it. I snipped it in the thread, but it's if you want to look at the site, I linked to the book in a thread that I have on Twitter on this, and then it's in the essay. So I'm not making this up. You can go buy the book that it's a chapter within where it says all this if you don't believe me. But for those of you who don't want to spend the money on it and do believe me, I have quotes, I have pictures in the thread, and I have quotes in the long article. So this professor, hired during the diversity push after the Floyd riots, department says they're not going to lower standards. This she may be very clever in doing all this, but this is still a sort of corrupting of academia and lowering of standards. Regardless of what her if her aptitudes are great and she's doing this, that's incredibly morally corrupt. And the so she's teaching, for those who are not familiar with Baylor, Christian Scriptures is a required course. It was required when we were there, and it's required now. And so she's teaching that, and she's assigning stuff related to this ideal. According to the statement the university gave her, um, she was nominated by a member of the religion department who, when he gave a statement in response to her being given an award for empathy. She was given an award for empathy, and the statement from the professor praised her for assigning womanist works to her students. So feminism was not, I guess, was not trendy enough or extreme enough. Maybe she had to relabel this as womanism. I'm sure there's many people that would say they're feminists that would not want to be associated with us, but
womanist is like it's more intersectional feminism. It's like like a specifically black feminism. Is that right?
I don't know. I read her example of it, and I read her work, and it seemed pretty grim as far as what she was advocating. But you may know more about it than I do.
I'm trying to, because I did read up on this when I was researching for my book. And I think there was like a number of black feminists who thought that mainstream feminism was too white. And so that's when they came up with a womanist phrase to kind of signal this is not a white feminism.
Okay. All right. Well, so she does say that. I did see that she wanted to center, I think, black women specifically in her interpretation. I'm sure there'd be many black women that would not want to be associated with this in any way, shape, or form, but that's how she framed it. And so I don't know that she assigned this essay to her students, but she assigned things that were based on how the religion department described it. It appears ideologically adjacent. And I had, from what I had heard, this interpretation did get through to her students. I heard about it because somebody I know was told by a student about her interpretation of Eve, and so I did some more research and found she had a chapter on it, and then read the chapter. And this is, the hiring stuff is ubiquitous throughout the university. Now, I don't think it's necessarily in every department, but it's pretty widespread where there's this push to hire people that are either female or not white. So basically anyone except a white man. And I know a lot of unemployed, very competent academics or people that have gone on to other fields. And I know this is hurting quality. There's you can see it at the risk of an early reveal. I've dug into the works of Beth Ellison Barr, and she is just being, she's in the history department. She's just being praised as this great history professor who's helping to help people understand the relationship of women in the church in the Middle Ages. I don't know that she read almost anything after she finished her dissertation. Like she's claiming the early church had a view of ordination more like Baptist, which I'm sure many of our people in the audience are Baptists and want to agree with that, but the particular claims she made were verifiably false if you read any original sources. She wrote this book, I think it was Becoming the Pastor's Wife. I've read 3 of her books. I read her dissertation and 2 of her other books, the most recent being Becoming the Pastor's Wife. And she just, she claims that she leads her audience to believe that the earlier church was ordaining women. And regardless of whether you think that's appropriate or not, her specific claims are just basically just open any book which discusses ordination from the Middle Ages, and her entire theory is refuted in every single work that discusses ordination, because her idea was ordination became like a standardized thing in the what she calls the Central Middle Ages, like the High Middle Ages. And there's lots of early church works on this, and she's being certainly foregrounded. I believe she's gotten a grant to go help rebuke the Baptists for not knowing church history, and she either doesn't know what she's talking about or she's just deceiving people. And so this is an example where it's not as on the nose as saying Eve is great, but it's another area where she's a better known scholar too. Like I've seen her cited in multiple denominational contexts. She was cited by a pastor. I actually got into an argument with her because the co-pastor of the church, Malcolm Foley, is associated with, tagged her into a conversation to prove that women were presiding over the Eucharist in the Middle Ages. And so that's not as on the nose, but it is an example of things that are going on.
I want to point out, just to tag on to that from a social justice perspective, getting the facts right is less important than getting the story right. So saying women were ordained in the Middle Ages, even if that's not factually true, if you're telling the right, kind of feminist story, that's what really matters. Like storylines, narratives, that's what matters in social justice. Facts, less so important.
Yeah, and to be clear, I was reviewing her book before I found out that I'm in her book. I'm not named, but I had the thing open to review it. It was taking notes, and looking things up before I found out I'm the tweeter. But it kind of makes it worse because she was wrong specifically on the points that I had asked for clarification. I mean, I didn't even start the argument. She was tagged into the thread, but I asked her to provide one original source of a woman presiding over the Eucharist, in, I think, the pre-Reformation church or something like that. That was my challenge, both to this pastor that had led his church to become less conservative on this issue, and then to her in the conversation. And so she kind of had notice. I'm not ambushing her with this. I mean, so she thought it worthwhile enough to respond, and as she responded with just extreme historical inaccuracies that she put in the book. And anyway, I'll have something out on this. Don't want to get us too derailed, but it is an example of the sort of scholarship that's getting foregrounded at Baylor. That's just wrong on a scholarly level. Even if you were not a Christian and didn't agree with me theologically, like I'm a relatively conservative Christian, and you wouldn't need to be a Christian to know that this is just bad as a purportedly medievalist work. And it seems like she just did her dissertation and stopped reading very many. I mean, I saw that she was reading Bede, which is one of those basic original sources she posted on her blog, but it seems like maybe she did her dissertation and just stopped reading original sources. But that's hardly the most extreme thing. So that's something that's happening in my old department that I'm particularly interested in. But our audience, and I think you yourself, as you already indicated, there's the School of Social Work is just on another level relative to most of Baylor. I think they were extremely active in the racial ideology stuff, and you may be able to tell me something about that. You may know
But
things
before we get into the because I feel like there's a lot. I've been looking through their podcast. There's a lot to dig into.
Okay.
On the social work thing, but I want to reiterate that I am rooting for Baylor University, just like you are. I root for them in sports and academics. I was on campus in the science building when we hit R1, making us a top tier research institution. Like the feeling of pride. I have my diploma hanging on the wall right over there. The feeling of pride that I have in the education I got at Baylor University, in the school, the academic excellence that the professors, that pride that they had, that they held, and I think if Baylor University no longer stands for a solid biblical foundation, if it no longer stands for academic excellence, is it just playtime for progressives? Is that like what our school's become?
I certainly, in some departments, it seems like it. Did you have anything else specific you wanted to do before we get into the School of Social Work, which is
Let's dig into social work. There's a lot of meat there.
Yeah, so I had heard that they were very active in the racial justice stuff during the Floyd riots. And so I did look into them, and what I found was pretty extreme. And my article, I went ahead and published it on my own because it was getting a little out of date. One reason was one of these things did get found out. They had got another grant, which was in a stream of grants related to like studying helping churches become comfortable with LGBTQ stuff. And they kind of earlier on, some of it was just helping them explore it, but it was, if you read carefully in between the lines, it was to get them on board with it. And so they had a grant promoting LGBTQ stuff, and that caused an uproar, and the head of the department didn't completely resign. I think he's coming back as a professor, but he's no longer the dean of the School of Social Work, not department, the School of Social Work. And so on there, they've got pro LGBTQ stuff just on the webpage. They had, I think they took it down. They had some extreme racial ideology stuff, which a whole bunch of departments put up, but they definitely had it. And they have a podcast. I assume this will be taken down quickly. So if you want to listen, guys, go listen or get your copy, because this will be easier to take down than some of the other stuff I'm describing. But they link to a podcast off their official Baylor website. Now, it has a disclaimer saying it doesn't necessarily represent, but it's platformed by being given a link prominently. It's being platformed where they have a discussion with one of their number. I think it's at least 2 professors and one other employee of the department. I can't remember if that one's also a professor, but I think all 3 have taught. At least 2 have taught, and they were discussing cases in which one of them was a kid who whose his parents were convinced that he was really a girl, and they were talking about affirming this. And they didn't talk about surgery. They didn't talk about the implications of it. But the whole podcast with Baylor professors and Baylor employees, being everyone in the podcast was employed by Baylor. I think they're all still employed by Baylor. Was talking about affirming people who kids who had decided, they and their parents had decided that they were really should be adopting an opposite sex identity, or that really they should adopt the gender presentation of the opposite sex. I'm not really sure how they would describe it, because they didn't get really that deep into the science of it. I thought they just said, here's somebody who's experiencing marginalization. This person might kill themselves. We have to affirm it. And there's one of the quotes was, we can have this discussion when the people have stopped dying, when we've stopped the people from dying. So it was just really
I want to point out real quick, I've had a number of experts on this podcast, like Mia Hughes and Stella O'Malley, Stephanie Wynn, Sasha Ayad, Pamela Garfield Yeager, all experts on this topic, who said, like, this, if you don't give them exactly what they want, they'll commit suicide. It's a complete myth. The numbers do not agree with that. The data does not suggest that. It's a complete fiction.
Yeah. One thing I highlighted in the article was, when this was at the Supreme Court, the lawyer for the ACLU who had adopted an opposite sex gender presentation, and that person, Chase Strangio, wouldn't go on the record saying, "Oh yeah, they're going to kill themselves at a higher rate." It was just like they feel more suicidal ideation, which was not the claim that was being made previously it's still being made by advocates of this ideology. The ideology is, you're saving lives by helping people become. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it, but by transing these people, by supporting them adopting another identity, an opposite sex identity. I mean, they wouldn't want to use the term opposite sex, but by adopting an opposite gender identity, a gender identity different than their biological sex. Again, it's really hard to describe it the way that they want it described without buying into their worldview. But by adopting this presentation, you're saving the person's life. And like I said, the podcast that I listen to, I have not listened to every single podcast on that thread of podcasts. Somebody probably should, but as of yet, I have not. Before they go down, somebody might want to go through all those. But the ones I listened to, yeah, I was just affirming it. They cited data. I know that their arguments are not factually supported. This stuff is not replicated, and I cited sources to that effect as I was arguing it. So I tried. It's a long essay, but I tried to, to the extent that there were sincere opponents who were overawed by the academic prestige of the other side, I did try to provide citations back that either backed it up with data. Some of them weren't academics, and then academic citations as well, pushing back at this stuff at an academic level. So if there's somebody who's kind of not that familiar with it, who's just overawed that somebody with a PhD is saying these things, I gave resources to show not everyone who's informed, not everyone with a PhD thinks this. And in fact, the stronger argument is that this is wrong, that common sense is actually correct, that this is not healthy to be telling little kids, oh yeah, you say you're a girl, that means, yeah, you're a girl, and we're afraid you're going to kill yourself if we don't tell you you're a girl. I mean, kids say lots of crazy things that you're not going to say, yeah, you're a train, right? But yeah, so that's disturbing. It's disturbing that it's platformed, and the School of Social Work is just rife with this. It's dominant. I don't know that every single professor, but it's so bad. I advocate completely disbanding the school. Like, there needs to be a complete house cleaning. Now, if there's a good professor who was there before it went crazy, I'm not saying that every single person has to be fired, because I realize there may be people who believe they're doing good work and their coworkers have just gone completely off the rails, and for whatever reason they don't want to leave right now. So that assessment, but that really needs to be a deep inquiry into how deep the rot is at the School of Social Work, because it's not like there was one talking about a show about like people dressing in drag in an affirmative way.
Yeah, and the only they referenced RuPaul's drag show on the podcast.
Yeah, and the only criticism of it was it hadn't been pro-trans enough at one point. So that was a criticism from the professors or the employees of our Christian institution, was that the Drag Race show was not pro-trans enough. That was what some of the Baylor professors thought. And this is not confined. So School of Social Work is the most extreme. I think we could do a whole podcast just on the School of Social Work, but I think, to be clear, it's not just them. Like, you go I think it's like there's so this is not in the article. This is something I came across later, but I think it's like a Latinx professors association or staff association. So like, who are we hiring where they name their employee association Latinx? Like, that's not how normal Hispanics talk, and they already had a
No.
student association. I mean, I you like go anywhere, go to any taco stand. They're not calling themselves. You say, "Are you Latin? Are you a Latinx?" Like, no, they're not saying that. So
What are
that's
you
not how
talking about?
normal.
I
That's
I
not how
want to
normal
jump
people.
in. I had a ex-girlfriend. She was half Puerto Rican, half Mexican, and I asked her. I was like, I was going to Baylor at the time. When I was dating her. I was like, "What do you think of the term Latinx?" And she goes, "Is that like Mexican Superman?" She'd never heard of the term.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, there was a student organization that at one time it was like Latin like /O/X/A or something like that. I have it it's in the article. I have what it used to be called and I have a link you can go see on the old page. I think the way it displays an internet archive would be kind of goofed up, but you can go see what that student organization rebranded, but it still has Latinx in the text, or at least did it not in the title, but in the text of describing what they were about. That was I think that was a program actually. That was a program to help Hispanic students thrive at Baylor, if I'm remembering correctly. And so these things are ubiquitous. You see it in multiple departments. There's a general disparagement of like the Anglo history of the school, and that's I think where a lot of I'm going to lose a lot of the professors. They're not going to want to push back on this, but I think it's appropriate. I mean, Baylor was founded by Baptist pioneers, and I think it's appropriate to say Baylor would not be there but for the Baptist pioneers, but for the Anglo pioneers in Texas. So if you have a grievance with them, I'm not saying that means you can't have a grievance with them, but the school is the school wasn't just there. It wasn't just there to be divided up. It had to be built. People made sacrifices to build it. And I think, I went on campus. They had a banner in November of 2024 last year where it looked like a land acknowledgement statement. I dug into it. It was a land acknowledgement. There was one on the Baylor. There was one on the Baylor webpage. I think there's still one somewhere where it mentioned all these Native American tribes, and one of them was the Comanche. And like, if you know the history, like the Comanche were, I mean, I think more violent than the Anglos. Certainly at least as violent as the Anglos. And they were genocidal. They were expansionist. I mean, it was like kill the men and kill the women that are not the right age to have kids at some point for you, rape a bunch of women. I mean, like, this is not like they were not in what is now Texas at the time the first Spanish European came into Texas. So it's not
That
like, I mean,
that That reminds me of there's a school in California that I was documenting who they taught their kids that the Aztec gods were gods of social justice. It's like the Aztecs practiced human sacrifice. Like, we're fetishizing these type of like indigenous peoples. Like, they weren't infants that were just helpless and innocent. Like, some of these people did very bad things.
yeah, well, and so I'm pretty willing to acknowledge that a lot of Native American groups got a horrible deal from people, including my own ancestors. Like, I can think of one battle, which I think where the Republic of Texas, was behaving in a really unjust manner under President Marabou B. Lamar. And my own ancestor fought in that battle. So, I mean, so I'm not denying that Native Americans were mistreated. This one involved the Cherokee being kicked out of the state after having been wrongfully kicked out of the Southeast. So I'm not denying that, but it's like there was an exhibit, and I couldn't see if it was still there last time I went to the Mayborn Library because they were remodeling that area. But there was an exhibit on the Comanche in the library. So I'm not reading too much in the banner because the exhibit in the library makes it sound like the Comanche just got in conflict with Anglos because of Anglos like or got into conflict because of Anglos like pushing people into their land. Like, I have a picture in the long article if somebody wants to see it. I didn't put it in the Twitter thread as of yet, but yeah. So there's an exhibit where you get the idea that Comanches, weren't really that violent. They're just there, and then because of the Anglos, they got in conflict with people. When actually their civilization was based on warfare, and I can respect things about their civilization, but it was not peaceful, and it was not in what's now Texas from time, before it was able to expand because they got horses that had been introduced to the continent by the Europeans. It was not, it wasn't just there when the Europeans arrived. Comanche was not just in Texas when the Europeans arrived. So, if we're going to have land acknowledgements, it just seems kind of odd to make it sound like they were just there, and then the Europeans came in. So that's and it's a habitual thing. Like any sort of racial grievance, which can be categorized as against non-Hispanic whites, is foregrounded. So there was an exhibit at the Baylor libraries where this was a traveling exhibit. This was not original to Baylor, but they chose to host it. Where it was this kind of starkly illustrates it, where they had a flag where the colors are taken from the Nazi flag, probably, or at least that's a likely thing. It was I think it was a workers group related to Cesar Chavez, maybe, and they used this banner. It wasn't used to promote Nazism, but they got the idea for the color scheme probably from the Nazis. And that picture is just, there's a picture of that just there without comment, maybe even presenting it positively, not commenting on the Nazi ties. And then there's all this stuff about Anglos at the border, presenting them as oppressing Mexicans, which to some extent they did. They absolutely did. I'm not going to deny that, but it's all just very one-sided. Like there's no discussion of. I think Mexican crime was really downplayed. It was just discussing life and death on the border, presented very much from a Hispanic perspective, which would be okay, but that seems to be all they're doing. Any sort of historical grievance where Anglos look bad is told. So now at the center of campus, there's a memorial to slavery, even though the current Baylor campus, or at least Baylor's use of it, postdates slavery. Baylor merged with a University in Waco and moved there from Independence, Texas, and had two campuses in Independence, and at least parts of the Baylor location or locations in Independence they speculated might have been built with slave labor, but they couldn't find any documents. So you have an R1 research university building a memorial to slavery, where one of the publicly stated reasons was that slaves built the old campus or were instrumental in building it, but they couldn't find a single bill or document substantiating that. They just had there was a slave owner who was involved with the building of the campus, and so it's inferred that his slaves were used. But I mean, as somebody pointed out to me, for skilled labor, it wasn't necessarily the case that it would be uncompensated necessarily. So, like, it seems plausible that slaves were involved, but it seems odd to build a giant stone monument on that basis without substantiating it when you're one of the top universities in the state and have vast resources to substantiate it if there's anything there. Now, the monument itself doesn't say it's because of that. It directly, I think, because reading in between the lines, it looks like the commission was not agreed on whether that was a reason to put the monument up. It's been in some of the press that's been listed as a reason. And the stone monument that's now in a very prominent place on campus mentions slavery as a reason for Texas independence, which you can read through the reasons for Texas independence. It's not there. And if you know what conditions were like in Mexico, if a bunch of Yankees who were anti-slavery abolitionists had moved to Texas and settled there instead of the more southern and slave-holding skew of the population that did move there, it wouldn't have mattered. No one from America wanted to live under those dysfunctional conditions where there wasn't a stable government. There was constant civil conflict. The leader of their colony was arrested when he wrote a letter complaining about the government. I mean, like I am absolutely now, because they said it was part of the reason they have an out, because I'm confident that many of the slaveholders who moved to Texas wanted it to just be openly pro-slavery, which under the Mexican system it couldn't be in the same way that it could be in the U.S. So I'm sure that's true, but to say have the only statement about Texas independence that's engraved in stone on campus, other than the seal itself, be
this gets back to just the general intellectual laziness of social justice scholarship, and B, intellectual dishonesty, where if we can place 6 degrees of separation and somehow connect it to slavery, then white supremacy is the reason for Texas's existence, and we're just going to throw out everything else.
Yes. And so I'm okay talking about it. I'm okay having I think it's quite appropriate, like at the Mayborn Museum, that there be an exhibit on slavery. Slavery was a huge issue in early Texas, and it's appropriate to talk about it. I don't think the appropriate place is at the center of campus or in as prominent a place on campus as it. Given the amount of space devoted for the memorial, I think it's not appropriate given the specific history of the location. I mean, it would be one thing if a giant slave market had stood there or something. That'd be a different discussion. If I can imagine a historical scenario in which it'd be appropriate, but it seems not really representative of the history of Baylor at that location. It seems, I mean, they mention it twice because they've surrounded Judge Baylor's statue. They've removed two little memorials, replaced them with stones around Judge Baylor with this, semicircle of stones, which or semi-rectangle of stones, which emphasizes slavery. And then they talk about it again in the central memorial. So imagine if you're a first generation Texan, and the only thing we say about Texas independence is, oh, we connect it with slavery. That just seems not representative or healthy. And I think this is where I'm going to lose a lot of the professors that are on my side on a lot of the other issues. I think that should be moved. I don't think that should stay there. I think it should be moved to the museum. Part of it, I mean, it's a big exhibit. We could leave some of the stone. There's like a kind of an amphitheater. So, but the central part of the exhibit, I think that there's a more appropriate location for that.
I want to kind of get back to this because I want to tie what's going on or what happened at Baylor University to what happened in society broadly, and this mass hysteria of social justice that really hit summer of 2020, the summer of love after George Floyd. You had very intelligent, intellectual people that just were put in a trance.
Yep.
Where I have, I'm a psychology professor, or I'm a stats professor or whatever, these are the things I value, and then just when that happened, just something just overcame people. The only thing that matters in this world is this very specific type of anti-racism. All that matters in my life is that I signal I care about being against racism. It doesn't matter if we put up this historically inaccurate, kind of illogical, out of place sign. What matters is that I look good being against racism. That's the only thing that really matters in the world. That's how all that swept across all of America, and Baylor University was not immune to that.
Right. And it was, I mean, looking at the monument, I mean, it's a pretty monument in many ways. I can agree with some of the things it says. It implies that the waters of baptism help to make us free and physically free as well as spiritually free. It says, it ties the spiritual freedom we have in Christ with physical freedom. I agree with all of that. I agree. Slavery was bad. It was good that it was abolished, but reframing the history of the university in a way which focuses on slavery to that degree, even though it is true the people that founded the school were largely slave owners. I just don't think it's representative, and particularly with the little reference to Texas independence. I don't want to make it to sound like that's my only complaint, but it's I think it's really going to mislead people as far as the history of the state. You think, oh yeah, Texas seceded because of slavery, and if you just know anything about what American society was like politically and what it hadn't even been Mexico that long, but what Mexico was like and the relative degrees of stability, it was not going to work. Even if you take in the most abolitionist subset of Americans and put them there, they wouldn't have been happy with the Constitution being overthrown by a dictator who styled himself after Napoleon. I mean, that just wasn't going to fly with basically any subset of settlers from the United States. And so, anyway, that's not the biggest thing happening at the school, but it is the part that people are going to be the most reluctant to push back on, because I think people are going to be more ready to push back on the LGBTQ stuff. I mean, the religion professor who's advocating, she's not advocating Satan worship because she doesn't think she's not going the full, there's a South Park episode about this, but anyway, she's not going fully into something like Satan worship, but she's praising the serpent. People can see that that's bad, but they're going to want to just like dial it back a little bit. And I think we need just a full course correction where we say Baylor was founded by pioneers from America, and we're okay with that. We're okay talking about their flaws, but we don't need to recenter the school on it's not even on mocking or criticizing our ancestors, on tearing them down, or we don't need to be recentering the school on victimhood, which is what the way that the statues have been set up. They moved Burleson's statue as well as what they did around Baylor's statue.
They moved Rufus?
Yeah, they moved Burleson's statue to where it's less prominent. It was standing on a pedestal which said a gift from his students and friends.
Like in the quad.
No, I don't know where they put the pedestal. They covered over his name on the quadrangle, and now it's just the quadrangle and not the Burleson quadrangle, because he had been pro-Confederacy, and like Abraham Lincoln, he had been a fan of. He'd wanted to relocate the freed slaves some other part of the world. At that time, that was a very common view, even among abolitionists. But because of that, even though he led the school and did a bunch of stuff to make the school a place where we can disagree with him. Where we have a platform where we can do things like disagree with him. He's been his memorial statue has been moved to a less prominent place. So with all these changes, it's just recentering the university on victimhood and not giving proper deference to the sacrifices which made it a place which existed. I mean, it wasn't there to be carved up. It was something which people made and sacrificed to build. But the current ongoing thing, as far as the corruption of academia at the school, aside from these more visual changes, which I've tied the two together. I think we need to push back against both. But a big thing is composition of the faculty changes. So we see pushes to make the faculty diverse that are not that concerned with Christian orthodoxy. I know somebody who applied for one position at Baylor was told, "Oh yeah, don't worry, you just go to some sort of church. We don't care too much about you being religious." I've heard other stories, which I don't want to dox the people who've told me stories, but yeah, basically, things like this have come up in the hiring process. I didn't get any documents on this yet, so if you're listening to this and you have documents, this is an area where it would be good to keep track of what was done internally to the extent that that's possible, because that's one thing I didn't get as deep in. I've had different people tell me things both before and after the publication of the article where they'll get panels to select new people for a position to try and make sure it's not a white guy. I mean, they wouldn't describe it that way, but sometimes it's just been white women. Like, it doesn't necessarily always somebody who's a minority. Sometimes they find a white woman, they find a minority, which if the person's qualified and aligned with the school's mission, great. But as we have seen, they have not done that. They have, in some cases, I'm told some of these people that were hired for these reasons have been Orthodox, but it seems like in general, the trend has been away from orthodoxy, with it seen most strikingly with the author of the "Eve is great for listening to the serpent" article. But that just is a really on the nose example of what's happening all across much of the university. I mean, there's some departments which are better, but I don't know on the hiring side. I don't know. Let's say I know classics, philosophy, great texts are all better. They're all on the better end. I have heard one of those departments at least. Oh no, Bick is. I think Bick maybe got better and then it got bad again.
Oh no!
When we were there, the stereotype was university scholars become Roman Catholic and the Bick students become agnostic, which was not. I knew some very solid Christians at Bick.
That was me.
Yeah. So anyway, the trend was university scholars becoming Roman Catholic and Bick students becoming agnostic, which there is a lack of in-depth instruction in just Protestantism at Baylor, which I'm not a Baptist, so for me, I may be a little skeptical to the degree that a Baptist institution can do this. But if you are Baptist, you shouldn't be skeptical. You should believe you can do this. If you think that being Baptist is the best take on being Protestant, then you should want to teach historic Protestantism and in the Baptist interpretation of that, perhaps to the students. And so, aside from all the leftism, a lot of the conservative professors don't really ground the students in that. And even if you're a Roman Catholic, you might want better opponents than people who just don't know anything at all about their own tradition. Like if you're a Roman Catholic, you presumably think you can beat the best version of Protestantism, right? And so at Baylor, even the more conservative professors a lot of times will say the Catholic tradition, but they kind of like frame it like it's Roman Catholic, whereas historically Protestants said we are Catholic. That's the historic Protestant claim. And if it's wrong, then that maybe casts some doubt on Protestantism. So I do think the way they're framing those issues maybe leads some students to become Roman Catholic, but then there's also just this general departure from any sort of Christianity. And so I appreciate some of the Roman Catholic professors standing up for the things we hold in common, for being a Christian witness on campus. I certainly agree with them more than the professor at the religion department who thinks Eve is good for listening to the serpent. So I think there is a lack of positive vision in terms of how Baylor relates to Christian history at the school, even though there was an attempt to develop this when we were there, or right before we were there. That's why there's a Christian heritage class as well as Christian scriptures. And under the current presidency, it seems that vision has languished. That vision has not been nurtured. R1 status has been attained, has been focused on. That's really been the focus. And Christian mission has been, given lip service to. And I think Livingston maybe thinks she's promoting Christianity. She's not Orthodox. She promoted the first female pastor or senior pastor in, I think, in Texas, in to a church in Waco, and then that person went on to a church in Georgia and embraced homosexuality. Well, she embraced the support of homosexuality at that church in Georgia. She was called to Washington, D.C., while Linda Livingston was at the church that she was called to. Now, I don't know what role Linda Livingston had with that, but Linda Livingston, she was in an article just about her being dean of George Washington University, University School of Business, I think it was, and she's holding this lady's picture. So she's really supportive of this lady, where she has her own profile picture taken, and she's holding this lady's picture. Now, if you go to this lady's website, the church that she is the leader of, she has herself at a pride parade on her official bio on the picture on the website. So that's her official picture is her at a positive role at a pride parade. So Linda Livingston just has this long history of promoting people that are not Orthodox. I don't know that she cares about it that much. I mean, she could be way more left wing than she is, but she's enabled people to be really left wing, even though she has not maximized it, because she would be fired if she were like maximum left wing. She would be removed. But
it seemed to me, from what I can understand, I don't know that Dr. Livingstone is all that committed to like a traditional, more like what we call Orthodox Christian vision, but she seemed very committed to academic excellence, from what I can tell. Did you agree with that?
And so and so that's, I mean, she's helped the school in its non religious metrics, and it's gone up to R1 under her tenure, but she hasn't developed the school in a, well, she's facilitated this. Like, she is to blame, to be clear. Like, she may not, she is not maximally woke, but she has enabled the woke craziness. She's supported it. She's empowered people who support it. She's pushed the diversity hiring. I believe she's personally pushed this, and the Board of Regents unanimously hired her, and they had reason. They didn't vet her properly, at the very least, because this was public. Like, their sermon, you can go, I think they're still online. You can go find the pro-homosexuality sermons by the lady who was her pastor at the time she was selected. Now, the sermons were at a different church, but she was called. It makes it even worse because Linda Livingston was at the church which called her after she'd preached those sermons. That doesn't really make it better, because that was all known. That was all public. And Linda Livingston was still praising her after that happened, and was saying it was like one of the best decisions in her life to help this lady get an official role at a church in Waco. So what she did outside of her academic role, she has continued to do in her academic role with promoting people who just are not committed to orthodoxy, even in just a broad sense of Christian orthodoxy. I'm not talking about anything specifically Baptist or related to one specific denomination. Just the things that Trinitarian Christians historically have agreed on. She's at best kind of lukewarm on institutionally supporting, even though I think she may be a sincere Christian of some sort. I mean, she posts prayers and things like that, but institutionally she's just been very corrosive at Baylor.
Yeah, what would you say to the claim? Because I've heard a lot of positive. I mean, I've definitely heard. I hear your side of the critique of Dr. Livingstone. I've heard a lot of positive things. Certainly she seemed very popular amongst the professors in terms of being a champion of academic excellence when I was there, and I've heard her described as towing this line between the old school Baptists and like the woke professors, and trying to take a moderate route. Does that make sense?
I think I know many people that are the type of person who would support that characterization, and I think she does support a form of academic excellence. But when we're talking about the professors, she's helped to move them left, because she's helped to select professors on criteria that move them left. Okay, and she's given a platform to people like Michael Foley, who is, even though he's not extreme on sexual stuff, he's Orthodox on that as far as I know. He's remained Orthodox on that. He's extreme, very, very extreme on anything related to race, and he's the official go-to guy for her administration on racial matters, certainly any sort of black-white issue. There were other African Americans she could have gone to who are not communism influenced in the same way that he clearly is, even though he's not supporting violent revolution. But so she's repeatedly platformed this stuff, and the Board of Regents has insulated themselves from criticism, from feedback, because there was a coup at the start of the 1990s to keep Baylor from being taken over by the movement throughout the Southern Baptist world to make their institutions be more conservative. So the head of Baylor, Herbert Reynolds, appealed to Baylor. I think the issue was the name in Baylor's original charter was not the name as the current institution, like it had developed, and the charter language was such that he could appeal to that to make Baylor to support the Board of Regents voting to make itself independent. So they had a legal argument. The other side did not. I don't think they fought it all the way to the end. They came to an agreement where the Baptist General Convention of Texas would select 25% of the regents. So that was a little better than zero, which I think that was what he was doing originally. But so basically, there was an auto coup which removed Baylor from a lot of accountability. And so I think what needs to happen is the Baptist General Convention of Texas needs to be very aggressive with the power it still has. There was also an agreement with the Alumni Association because Baylor got really aggressive trying to get rid of, right when we were there, there was a huge fight with the Alumni Association, and the compromise was the alumni get to pick some regents, but it's so the board has such a role over it. It's really hard for that to give feedback because they vet the candidates and make it hard to, you can't run on issues. So at least overtly. So it makes it hard to use that to hold the school to account. So the regents bears ultimate responsibility, and particularly given that they asserted themselves in a way to make themselves independent of accountability, they really deserve blame, given that this is a group which seized power that was not originally delegated to it a few decades ago. And so they've kind of really presided over the school. At this point, it's moved very far away from Christian orthodoxy. So any sort of lever that can be used on the part of the Baptists in Texas, and I'm not one, they need to push on this. So there's a limit to how far I can push on these issues. But yeah, I think Linda Livingston is smart. I think she's competent. And she's been described that way even by some of her opponents, but she's not committed to Christian orthodoxy. Her vision for Christianity will eventually just become completely secular. I'm not saying that she says, "Oh, I want it to become secular." That's just what's going to happen, regardless of what she wants. She's putting it on a trajectory. She probably doesn't understand the consequences. That's going to just completely gut the school and make it completely secular if it's allowed to go on. So you basically have to fight back, and you got to fire people because they will assert power within the institution. They will they have mandatory trainings that you have to take to enroll in classes. I mean, they have been aggressive asserting themselves within the school. When you don't fire academics that do this stuff, you're not promoting academic freedom. You're allowing them to force their views on the students and other people who are not as powerful within the institution, whether that be junior faculty, whether that be people who are aligned with the actual mission of the school that are applying for a job and are discriminated against by some departments. I've heard stories, a few, not, I think there's a lot more. That's one area where there's a lot more to be delved into that I delved into in the article. So this is going to get worse unless it gets better. It cannot stay where it is. If you're a parent and you want to send your kids to Baylor, there's departments where they could have a good education. Like I think the honors college is pretty good. Maybe not BIC. I think BIC, like I said, it depends on who's running it right now. I think it did get better for a bit. I don't know that it's better now, but depending on where they're going, it could be a great education for kids now, but it's not going to stay that way. It's going to get worse, and it's going to all.
I love the BIC, by the way.
Good.
I thought it was great.
Well, I have, hey, one of my best, some of my best friends are BICers, so don't take it personally.
You could probably like spot the BIC kids in a crowd because they're the weird looking ones.
Yeah. So. And again, I'm not as up to date on where that program is. It did seem like they did try and make it better for a while. I don't know if that's still in effect, but I
want to go back to the School of Social Work just for a minute and touch on something there. I was scrolling through this podcast of theirs, and you see a lot of talk about questioning and deconstructing the gender binary. In the book of Genesis, it says God made male and female. And then Mark, Jesus reiterates God made male and female. If you don't like the Bible, I quoted a paragraph in my book from physicist Alan Sokol and evolutionary biologist Richard Dawkins talking about sex is a binary and it's immutable. There's only two, and you can't change them, right? So we're contradicting biblical truth, and we're contradicting science.
Yeah, there's
another thing.
There's eggs or there's sperm. There's no third gamete. Like
exactly.
You can be sterile, but you're not going to produce. You're not going to produce a third one. Yeah.
Exactly. There was one glorifying white tears. I don't know if you've seen much about this. Is big amongst critical race theory scholars.
I didn't see the white. They said white tears on the Baylor
White
website.
tears, yeah. It's like making
I
white people cry or upsetting white people is like a part of racial progress.
Well,
Contrast that.
I have seen that used to like say white people cry in order to incite violence. So maybe if I saw it in that
Yes.
context, I might have seen it there where it's like white people are crying in order to like stir up a lynch mob or something like that. Maybe if it was in that context, I might have seen it.
Yeah, but part of that, what they're driving at is it's good to upset white people, and I wanted to contrast that with the Book of Revelation, where it says in the end Jesus is going to wipe every tear away. Or you could go from like an Enlightenment rationalist perspective, which says it's not okay to be a jerk to anyone. And then there was one talking about queering. They kept using the word queering in this podcast, like queering religion was one.
That's really
and
weird.
if you know anything about queer theory, it's extremely against biblical principles, but it's also extremely anti-science. So with so much of what I'm seeing at this School of Social Work, we're absolutely just a direct affront to biblical principles and an attack on academic excellence.
And that's really
being very anti-science.
And that's really important in a Baylor context because the liberal Baptist pitch was, we're not going to get in the way of the scientists with religion, right? But this ideology is very anti-empirical, right? So it just like the religion department in particular would have said we need to be independent of the fundamentalists, but they've adopted this completely anti-data, anti-evidence, or they're platforming a very anti-data and anti-evidence worldview in the religion department, whose entire reason for not being fundamentalist was we're gonna like be data-based, right? So you see a more extreme or more thoroughgoing example of that in the School of Social Work. Because I think there's still some good religion professors. There may be some good social work professors that keep their heads down or something, but I'm not 100% sure of that. I do think there's some good religion professors at Baylor, but
I'm tempted to pick your brain on who you like and who you don't like, but I don't know if I want to dig into that.
See, the problem is my thesis advisor, my honors thesis advisor, did care about Christian orthodoxy, and he was a Baptist, and he would not be okay with this. I don't know how conservative he was, but he certainly would. This would not have been okay. He's retired, and I was motivated to write the article because there was another professor, not in the religion department, who had come aboard like right after I left, I think, and then he retired, and he talked about some of the reasons being like the race and gender trainings, and so that motive, because I thought about writing. I kind of hoped somebody else would get into this a bit more, but I'd been thinking about writing an article about it and decided, okay, I'm going to get into it. And I thought, I'm going to do it. I want to do it at a high level of detail. In this talk, I've talked somewhat more general. If you think I've said things without any basis or without any data, and you're listening to me talking, I have citations and examples in the over 100-page article with links. I mean, I try and have data points, even at least in passing, and in some places in great detail. But yeah, I think some of the professors that I knew have retired, and then the other ones that I think are good, I don't know that I want to like paint a target on their back right now. I would like it if somebody would come talk to you directly. I am not super plugged into the professor world at Baylor as it stands now. So I'm not claiming that I'm speaking for the conservative faculty. Like I said, I think the conservative faculty are not going to want to clean house as thoroughly as I do, but they're still good enough that they could be part of the cleaned house, if that makes sense. Like I think that they could be part of the solution, even if they're not willing to say, yeah, my coworkers need to be fired, the president of the university needs to be fired, the School of Social Work needs to be abolished, which I believe all those things. But
so that kind of gets us into my final question here. We're seeing this university that we love, that we have a lot of pride for and a lot of respect for. We see it going in a direction that we don't like. What is the solution here?
So I think it's there's two different aspects into it. One is the information aspect. A lot of people don't know what's going on. I've written a long article. What needs to happen is a journalist needs to pick that article up and then go through, vet it, vet it, see if what I said is true. Pick the parts that are relevant to that journalist's audience or the length of time the journal has to present the information, and then present that to a broader audience. So I've done a lot of work. So if a journalist will pick this up, the journalist can go through and find things much more quickly, and then vet them, do their due diligence and make sure it's true. So that needs to happen to get enough pressure on the university to fix things. Okay. I summarized my stuff in a Twitter thread. I'm summarizing here. And I hope that'll get a little bit more attention to it. I'll summarize it in some other venue, but that's part of it. And then the pressure points institutionally are, we need to start running people in the alumni elected region elections, even though they can't run on it. We at least need to be aggressive enough that they have to start rejecting people because they're running. Like, once they have to do that, that's like internally, I don't think the Board of Regents all agrees with all this stuff. And I'm sure many of them don't know, did not do their due diligence, would be uncomfortable at least with a lot of this. I'm sure some of them are like, one's a conservative judge. I don't think he's okay with the gender theory, right? So it needs to be publicized. And if they're having to reject candidates, and then they have to talk about it amongst themselves and say, why are we having right-wing ideologues or whatever running, demagoguing these issues? Well, they're not all going to agree when they have that conversation. So you can put pressure on them just by trying to run people within the highly constrained framework they have for alumni elected regents. And then you can additionally, the Baptists need to organize to try and, the regions that they pick, they need to make sure all of those are solid. And I don't think they need to pick solid, intelligent people are willing to be institutionally aggressive, and start making demands that move the discourse in a more acceptable direction, and don't just go along. Like, start saying this professor has to be fired. We've got to put somebody in who's got to bring the school in a Christian institutional direction at these particular key points in the institution, and make them fight you. And I don't think all of the elected regents are like lunatic woke people. I don't think that's true. I think there's a number of elected regents that I think are conservative. I can think of at least 2 right now that I think are conservative leaning. They may not agree with me on the race stuff, but certainly some of the things I've highlighted they would agree on. And if the Baptists would put institutional pressure, I think that could make some positive changes. But it has to be publicized. So having this conversation is one step. Have the more detailed argument. I have a summary of these things on Twitter for somebody who has less time. And so I really, basically this needs to get in front of journalists who have an audience that includes people that care about either Christian institutions or Texas institutions or Baptist institutions.
I love that answer. Ian, where can people find you and your article?
So the easiest place for people that don't know me, I posted it. I posted it on LinkedIn. So you see, I'm pretty committed to that. I don't list my employer on LinkedIn. So if someone takes issue with me over this, it'll have to be because the idea is not because I associate it with my undisclosed employer. And then the other place I posted on Facebook, but that's just for friends. So then I posted it on X or Twitter, so you can find it there, or you can just look it up on WordPress. And the title of the article is "Can Baylor Be Saved?" It's on WordPress. My website is IB Perry at WordPress, so you can search for it there if you're not on Twitter, and you should be able to find it. And it's a long PDF. Or you can just if you're friends with Ryan, you can just contact Ryan, and he can find figure out how to find the PDF. So.
Nice. Awesome. I love this conversation, Ian. Love talking to you, and, hope and pray that our university goes in a different direction in the future.
Yeah. Thank you.